The discovery. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Thrace wiped his eyes during the memorial service. Around him, 200 alien delegates sat motionless, their various sensory organs fixed on the human representative. Water streamed down his face in clear rivulets, his shoulders shaking with what appeared to be physical distress. Valaxis, the Kryn observer, leaned toward her research partner. Is the human malfunctioning? Should we summon medical assistance? Her companion, a gelatinous plorvin named Quell, rippled uncertainly. Unknown. I have documented this phenomenon 3 times now in human subjects. They call it crying. But I cannot determine its purpose. On the central platform, Ambassador Thrace stood to give his speech honoring the fallen colonists of Kepler Station. His voice cracked as he spoke of the 73 lives lost in the reactor failure. More water leaked from his eyes. Several aliens in the front row shifted uncomfortably, wondering if they were witnessing some kind of toxic fluid expulsion. We remember them not just as names on a memorial wall, Thrace said, his voice thick with emotion, but as mothers, fathers, children, and friends. They were loved. And they will be missed. After the ceremony, Valaxis approached the human ambassador in the diplomatic gardens. Her crystalline form refracted the station's artificial sunlight into rainbow patterns across the pathway. Ambassador Thrace, I must inquire about your physical condition during the memorial. Are you experiencing organ failure? The fluid expulsion from your optical organs was quite pronounced. Thrace managed a sad smile and dabbed at his eyes with a cloth. No, Valaxis. I'm perfectly healthy. Those were tears. I was crying because I was sad. Sad. Valaxis's translator struggled with the concept. You mean experiencing suboptimal emotional parameters? Yes. Crying is how humans express deep emotion, particularly grief, sorrow, or sometimes even joy. Valaxis stood silent for a long moment, processing this. In her 300 years of diplomatic service, she had never encountered a species that leaked fluids in response to emotional stimuli. The Kryn experienced sadness, certainly, but it manifested as a dimming of their inner light, not this bizarre hydraulic response. Fascinating, she finally said. And this crying, it serves what evolutionary purpose? Thrace paused, considering. I'm not sure anyone knows for certain. But it helps. It releases something inside us. It's a way of acknowledging pain, of honoring what we've lost. That night, Valaxis began her research in earnest. She accessed the Galactic Archive's files on humanity, a species that had joined the Council only 40 years prior. She discovered that among the 4,317 known sentient species in the galaxy, humans were unique in this trait. The Vorn had chemical signals. The Pelthans experienced chromatic shifts. The silicon-based Cormith vibrated at specific frequencies. But none of them cried. None of them produced salt water from their eyes in response to emotion. Valaxis compiled a preliminary report and distributed it to the Xenobiology department. Within a solar cycle, she received requests from 70 different research institutions across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to understand the crying humans. But understanding would prove more difficult than any of them imagined. The investigation. Dr. Meridax of the Peloton Science Institute arrived at Earth 6 months after Valaxis's initial report. She came with a team of 12 researchers representing 8 different species, all eager to study the phenomenon of human crying. Their human liaison, Dr. Sora Nakamura, met them at the Earth diplomatic station with barely concealed amusement. So the galaxy wants to know why we cry? Sora asked, leading the group through the facility. I have to admit, I never thought that would be the thing that fascinated aliens most about us. It is unprecedented, Meridax explained, her feathered crest rippling with colors that indicated intense curiosity. We have studied the biological mechanism. Your lacrimal system, the production of tears for eye lubrication, we understand. But emotional crying? This appears nowhere else in our xenobiological databases. Sora nodded. Well, you've come to the right place. We've arranged for you to observe and interview a variety of humans in different emotional states. Though I should warn you, we can't exactly schedule crying on command. The research began with clinical observation. The team watched recordings of humans crying at weddings, funerals, during movies, while reading books, at graduations, during reunions with loved ones, and in moments of personal triumph. They measured tear composition, facial muscle contractions, breathing patterns, and neurological activity. What they found was more complex than expected. The chemical composition varies, noted Quell, who had joined Meridax's team. His gelatinous form pulsed with different colors as he analyzed data. Tears from physical irritation differ from emotional tears. The emotional ones contain higher levels of stress hormones and natural painkillers. So crying is a stress response mechanism? Asked Valaxis, who monitored the research closely. Partially, Sora interjected. But it's more than that. People don't just cry when they're stressed. They cry during moments of profound beauty, when they're moved by art or music, when they experience overwhelming love or compassion. The researchers were baffled. Why would a survival-oriented species develop a response that made them temporarily vulnerable during emotional moments? Crying blurred vision, created noise, and required recovery time. From an evolutionary standpoint, it seemed counterproductive. Dr. Kesix, a logical and methodical Zenther researcher, proposed a hypothesis. Perhaps it is a malfunction. An evolutionary dead end that persists because it does not sufficiently harm survival rates to be selected out. Sora laughed, surprising the researchers. You think crying is a bug, not a feature? Can you provide evidence otherwise? Kesix challenged. How about this? Sora said, pulling up research on her holographic display. Humans who suppress their emotions and don't allow themselves to cry have higher rates of psychological distress, physical illness, and social isolation. Crying appears to be essential to human mental health. But why? Valaxis pressed. What is it about fluid expulsion that provides psychological benefit? Sora was quiet for a moment. That's the question, isn't it? Let me introduce you to someone who might help. She brought in Dr. Elias Thorne, a human psychologist specializing in emotional expression. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and a warm smile. Crying, Dr. Thorne explained to the assembled alien researchers, is fundamentally about connection. Yes, we sometimes cry alone, but even then we're processing our relationship to others, to loss, to love, to meaning. Tears are a signal, to ourselves and to others, that something matters deeply to us. A signal, Meridax repeated, her crest brightening. This makes sense from a communication standpoint. Exactly. When a human cries, others respond with compassion. It's a vulnerability that invites care. In our evolutionary history, being part of a supportive community was essential for survival. Crying reinforced social bonds. Kesix remained skeptical. My species maintains social cohesion through logical resource sharing and mutual benefit calculations. We do not require fluid expulsion. Dr. Thorne smiled gently. Different species, different solutions. But tell me, Kesix, when a member of your community experiences loss or difficulty, how do you respond? We provide assistance based on our capability and their need. And how do you know they need help? Kesix paused. They communicate their requirements through standardized requests. They have to ask? Of course. Dr. Thorne nodded. Humans sometimes struggle to ask for help. We're proud, stubborn creatures. But when we cry, we don't have to ask. Others see our tears and know we need support. It bypasses our reluctance to appear weak. This concept rippled through the research team. Several species in the galaxy struggled with efficient resource allocation during crises because individuals were reluctant to signal need. Could the humans crying be a solution to a universal problem? But there was still something missing. Something the researchers couldn't quite grasp. They were about to find out what. The revelation. 3 months into the research project, an incident occurred that changed everything. The research station hosting Meridax's team experienced a critical failure in its life support system. The backup systems engaged, but for 40 terrifying minutes, the crew of 83 beings, including 27 humans, believed they might die. When the crisis passed and safety was assured, the researchers emerged from their emergency stations shaken but unharmed. Valaxis noticed immediately that every single human on the station was crying. Not just a few. All of them. Engineers, scientists, administrators, even the children in the educational wing. All had tears streaming down their faces. More striking was what happened next. The humans found each other. They embraced, held each other, some simply sat together with hands clasped. Their crying seemed to synchronize, becoming a shared experience rather than individual reactions. And slowly, gradually, the tears stopped. The humans began to smile, then laugh with relief. The emotional transition was rapid and complete. Meanwhile, the non-human crew members remained in their individual states of distress. The Kryn flickered erratically. The Pelton feathers showed chaotic color patterns. The Zenther retreated into isolation, processing the trauma through pure logic. Each species had their own coping mechanism, but none seemed as efficient as the humans' collective emotional release. Valaxis observed 2 human technicians, Marcus Reeves and Yuki Tanaka, sitting in the observation deck, shoulders touching, tears still wet on their faces but smiles breaking through. That was too close, Marcus said, his voice rough. Way too close, Yuki agreed. When the alarms went off, I thought about my daughter. That I might never see her again. I thought about my mom, Marcus said. How I never told her I forgave her for everything. They sat in silence for a moment, then Yuki asked, "Are you okay?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I am now. You?" "Yeah." Valaxis approached them cautiously. "Forgive my intrusion, but I must understand. You both experienced severe psychological distress moments ago. You were crying. Now you appear recovered. How did this happen so quickly?" Yuki wiped her eyes. "We cried it out, I guess. Let it go." "Let it go?" "The trauma simply dissipates." Marcus considered this. "Not exactly. It's still there. We'll probably have nightmares, might feel shaky for a few days. But crying helps us process it, makes it manageable. And doing it together, knowing we're all going through the same thing, that helps most of all." "So crying is a trauma processing mechanism?" "It's a lot of things," Yuki said. "It's how we grieve, how we heal, how we connect. It's how we remind ourselves that we're alive and that things matter to us." Valaxis reported her observations to the research team. That night, they held an emergency session to reassess their understanding. "What we have been missing," Dr. Thorne explained to the assembled alien researchers, "is the social and psychological context. You've been studying crying as an isolated biological phenomenon. But it's not. It's part of a larger human trait, our capacity for deep emotional experience and our need to express and share those emotions." "But this seems inefficient," Kesix argued. "These strong emotions create vulnerability, impair judgment, and require recovery time." "In the short term, yes," Dr. Thorne agreed. "But humans are long-term thinkers, sometimes despite ourselves. Our emotions, including our capacity to cry, serve important functions over the course of a lifetime. They help us form deep bonds, maintain psychological health, process trauma, and find meaning in existence." Meridax's crest displayed patterns of deep thought. "You are suggesting that crying is an adaptation that sacrifices short-term efficiency for long-term psychological and social benefits?" "Exactly. Humans are intensely social creatures. We need deep connections to thrive. Crying facilitates those connections by making our inner emotional states visible to others and creating moments of shared vulnerability." Quell, who had been silent throughout the discussion, suddenly pulsed a bright blue. "I am beginning to understand. When humans cry together, they create what you call solidarity. They acknowledge shared experience. This would create powerful social cohesion." "Yes," Sora exclaimed. "You're getting it. We cry at funerals not just because we're sad, but because we're acknowledging together that we lost someone important. We cry at weddings because we're celebrating love as a community. We cry during movies because we're experiencing a story together, feeling the same feelings at the same time." Valaxis processed this information through her crystalline matrix. A thought occurred to her, one that she hesitated to voice. "Dr. Thorne, I have read human literature and history. Your species has experienced tremendous suffering. Wars, genocides, natural disasters, personal tragedies. You face mortality, loss, disappointment, and pain. Is it possible that humans developed crying as a necessary adaptation to cope with the intensity of your suffering?" The room fell silent. Dr. Thorne's eyes grew wet, and despite knowing he was surrounded by researchers studying this exact phenomenon, he let the tears come. "Yes," he said softly. "I think you've touched on something profound, Valaxis. Humans feel things deeply, perhaps more deeply than many species. We are aware of our mortality in ways that haunt us. We love intensely and lose inevitably. We hope, dream, and are disappointed. We need crying because we need a way to survive the weight of our own emotional depth." "This seems like a terrible burden," Kesix observed. Dr. Thorne smiled through his tears. "It is. But it's also what makes us human. Our capacity for sorrow is matched by our capacity for joy. Our ability to grieve deeply means we also love deeply. You can't have one without the other." The alien researchers sat in contemplation. They were beginning to understand, but they had not yet experienced the full truth of human tears. That would come in the most unexpected way. The bridge. Valaxis couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Thorne's tears. In all her years studying various species, she had catalogued countless behaviors, but she had never seen anything that moved her quite like watching a human cry. She requested a private meeting with Sora Nakamura in the station's botanical gardens, where earth plants grew under carefully calibrated lights. "I want to understand not just the mechanism but the experience," Valaxis said, her crystalline structure refracting light across the leaves around them. What does it feel like to cry? Sora settled onto a bench beside a small fountain. That's hard to explain to someone who's never done it. It's physical and emotional at the same time. There's a tightness in your chest, a pressure building up. Your throat constricts. Your eyes start to burn a little. And then the tears come and it's like a release. A release of what? Of whatever you're holding inside. Sadness, grief, frustration, even sometimes joy when it's too big to contain. Crying is what happens when your emotions are too powerful to keep bottled up. Valaxis was silent for a long moment. My people experience sadness. When a Kryn experiences loss, our inner light dims. It can take years to return to full luminosity. Some never do. But we do not have this release mechanism you describe. We simply endure the dimming. Sora's expression softened with compassion. That sounds incredibly lonely. It is, Valaxis admitted, and in that moment she felt something unprecedented. A longing. A wish that she could cry, could release the dimness that had plagued her since her life partner had ceased functioning 30 years ago. I have been dim for decades, Sora. And I have no way to let that sorrow go. Sora reached out slowly, giving Valaxis time to withdraw if she wished. When the Kryn didn't move, Sora gently touched the edge of her crystalline form. I'm so sorry for your loss. Even if you can't cry, your grief is valid. The love you had was real. Something in Sora's words, or perhaps the gentle touch, made Valaxis's inner light flicker in a pattern she had never experienced before. It was unstable, chaotic, but somehow it felt like movement, like something long frozen beginning to thaw. Sora, may I observe you in a moment of genuine emotion? Not as a research subject, but as a friend. Sora smiled. Friends? I like that. Yes, of course. What did you have in mind? I would like you to share with me something that makes you cry. A memory, a story, something real. Sora took a deep breath. Okay, I'll tell you about my sister Hannah. She died 5 years ago. Cancer. She was only 32. As Sora spoke, tears began to form in her eyes. She told Valaxis about Hannah's love of music, her terrible jokes, her fierce loyalty. She described the last days in the hospital, holding Hannah's hand, promising to live enough life for both of them. The tears flowed freely now, and Sora didn't try to stop them. I miss her every day, Sora whispered. Sometimes the grief hits me out of nowhere like a wave. And I cry, and somehow that makes it bearable. Like I'm honoring her by letting myself feel the loss. Valaxis watched the tears track down Sora's face, watched the way her body shook slightly, heard the catch in her breathing. And for the first time in her long life, Valaxis wished desperately that she could do the same. Not just to study it, but to feel it. To have that release. Thank you for sharing this with me, Valaxis said. I understand now that crying is not a weakness or a malfunction. It is a form of courage. You allow yourself to fully experience pain, trusting that you will survive it. Yeah, Sora said, wiping her eyes. That's exactly it. Word of this conversation spread through the research team, and something shifted in their approach. They stopped viewing crying as a curious biological oddity and began seeing it as a window into something profound about human nature. Dr. Kesix, the skeptical Zenther, requested his own private session with Dr. Thorne. I have been analyzing the data, Kesix said in his precise, measured way, and I have reached a conclusion that troubles me. My species prides itself on logic and emotional regulation. We consider emotional volatility to be primitive, something to be evolved beyond. But watching humans, I wonder if we have lost something important. Dr. Thorne leaned forward with interest. What makes you think that? Efficiency. Despite your emotional crying, humans recover from trauma more quickly than Zenther. Your social bonds are deeper and more resilient. Your communities support individuals in crisis more effectively. By every measurable outcome, your emotional expressiveness makes you stronger, not weaker. That's quite an admission from a Zenther, Dr. Thorne observed gently. I am a scientist. I follow the evidence. But I confess, I do not understand how to bridge the gap between intellectual comprehension and experiential understanding. I can see that crying benefits humans, but I cannot feel why it matters. Dr. Thorne smiled. Kesix, can I ask you something personal? Have you ever lost someone important to you? The Zenther was silent for a long moment. Yes. My research partner of 40 years. They died in an accident on a mining station. It was illogical how much it affected me. I could not process the loss through normal Zenther methods. The calculations did not help. The resource reallocation did not fill the absence. I became, for the first time in my life, inefficient. What did you do? I continued to work. What else was there? And the pain? It remains. It is always there, a background inefficiency in all my processes. Dr. Thorne's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Kessex, you're still grieving. You've been grieving for how long? 7 years. 7 years of carrying that pain alone, trying to logic your way through it. Dr. Thorne shook his head sadly. I wish I could teach you to cry. I think it would help. But I am not built for it. My species has no such mechanism. No, but maybe you have something else. Some way to release, to express, to share the burden. Have you ever told anyone about your partner? About what you lost? No. It is private. Personal. Inefficient to burden others. Kessex, that's where you're wrong. Sharing grief doesn't burden others. It creates connection. Let me show you something. Dr. Thorne pulled up a video of a human funeral. Not a state ceremony, but an intimate gathering. The researchers watched as humans stood together, many crying, and one by one spoke about the deceased. They told stories, shared memories, laughed and cried together. This is how we process loss, Dr. Thorne explained. Together. We make the private public. We share the weight. And somehow, impossibly, that makes it lighter. Kessex watched the video in silence. When it ended, he said something that surprised everyone in the room. I would like to tell you about my partner. If you will listen. Of course, Dr. Thorne said gently. And for the next hour, Kessex spoke. He described his partner's brilliant mind, their shared discoveries, their quiet companionship. He detailed the accident, the senseless random failure that took them. He admitted his ongoing struggle to find meaning in work without them. Kessex couldn't cry. He had no tears. But his voice, usually so precisely modulated, wavered and cracked. His posture, usually rigidly upright, sagged. And when he finished speaking, Dr. Thorne reached out and placed a hand on the Zenther's shoulder. Thank you for sharing that with me, Dr. Thorne said, and his own tears fell freely. Your partner sounded wonderful. I'm so sorry for your loss. Kessex looked at the human's tears, tears shed for a Zenther he'd never met, for grief that wasn't even his own. And something in the Zenther's rigid logic began to shift. You cry for my loss? Why? Because you're hurting. Because loss is universal. Because I can and you can't. In that moment, Kessex understood. Crying wasn't just about the one who cried. It was about witnessing, about shared humanity even across species, about the willingness to feel another's pain. I cannot cry, Kessex said slowly. But I think, perhaps, I am beginning to understand why you do. The research project was evolving into something none of them had anticipated. It was becoming a bridge between species, a chance to explore not just human crying but the nature of emotion itself. But the most important discovery was still to come. The crisis. The breakthrough came during a tragedy. 6 months into the research project, news reached the station that sent shockwaves through the entire galaxy. The colony on Theta Novaris, a thriving settlement of 15,000 beings representing 40 different species, had been destroyed by an asteroid impact. There had been no warning. No time to evacuate. Everyone was gone. The research station fell into chaos. Beings from multiple species had lost friends, family members, colleagues. The grief was universal, but the responses were vastly different. The Kryn dimmed to nearly invisible. The Pelthan's feathers turned ashen gray. The Zenther retreated into isolated calculations. Each species withdrew into their own cultural methods of processing loss. Except the humans. The 17 humans on the station found each other almost immediately. They gathered in the common area and they cried. They cried together, holding each other, sharing memories of the lost, and their grief was loud and visible and impossible to ignore. Valaxis, who had lost a colleague on Theta Novaris, found herself drawn to the human gathering. She stood at the edge, watching, her own light dim with sorrow. Sora noticed her and immediately broke away from the group. Valaxis, I heard about your colleague. I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you. I am processing. Would you like to sit with us? Sora asked gently. You don't have to be alone. Valaxis hesitated. I do not wish to intrude. This is a human way of grieving. Grief is grief, Sora said. Come, sit with us. Valaxis joined the circle of humans. They made space for her and several told her they were sorry for her loss. Then they continued what they had been doing, crying, talking, remembering. Marcus told a story about his friend who died on Theta Novaris, a researcher who had terrible taste in music but the biggest heart. Several people laughed through their tears. Yuki spoke about the children from the colony school that she'd been mentoring remotely. Her voice broke and others reached out to touch her shoulder, her hand, offering wordless comfort. Valaxis watched and listened. She couldn't cry but she could share this space. And gradually she felt her light begin to stabilize. Not brighten, not yet, but stop its downward spiral. The dimness was still there, but it was no longer pulling her down into darkness. This is what crying does, she realized aloud. It creates this space where grief can exist without destroying you. Dr. Thorne, who had joined the circle, nodded. Yes, we make room for the pain. We acknowledge it together. And somehow that makes it survivable. Across the station, other non-human crew members began to notice the human gathering. One by one they approached. Tentatively at first, uncertain if they would be welcome. But the humans made space for everyone. Keswick sat beside Dr. Thorne, his logical Zenther mind struggling to process the loss through communal grieving. He couldn't cry but he could speak. And when he talked about his research partner who had died years ago, and about the colleague he'd just lost on Theta Novaris, his voice cracked in ways that Zenther voices weren't supposed to crack. Dr. Thorne put an arm around the Zenther's shoulders. Keswick stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed into the contact. This is highly irregular, he said, but he didn't pull away. Grief is irregular, Dr. Thorne replied. It breaks all the rules. Quell, the gelatinous Plorvin, shared that he had lost his offspring in the disaster. Plorvin reproduction was complex, involving genetic contribution from multiple parents, and Quell had contributed to 17 offspring currently living on various colonies. 3 had been on Theta Novaris. I did not know them well, Quell admitted, his form rippling with patterns of distress. Plorvin do not maintain close bonds with offspring. But I find myself experiencing unexpected disruption to my cognitive processes. That's grief, Sora said gently. It doesn't follow logic. You lost part of your genetic legacy, part of your future. Of course you're disrupted. But I have 14 other offspring. The loss of 3 should be statistically manageable. Grief doesn't care about statistics, Yuki said, tears still wet on her face. Each loss matters individually. Those 3 were unique. They can't be replaced by the others. Quell pulsed a deep purple, the Plorvin equivalent of profound thought. I think I am beginning to understand. Humans cry because you refuse to treat loss as merely statistical. You insist that each individual matters, that each grief deserves acknowledgement. Yes, several humans said in unison. The gathering continued for hours. Beings came and went, but the core group remained, creating a space of shared sorrow. The humans cried throughout, their tears a constant presence. And gradually, those who couldn't cry began to find their own ways of expressing grief. The Kryn flickered in synchronized patterns, creating a visual language of sorrow. The Peltons harmonized in low, mournful tones. Even the Zenther, usually so stoic, began to speak more freely about loss, their logical facades cracking to reveal the pain beneath. Meridax, the Pelothon lead researcher, approached Valaxis near the end of the gathering. This is remarkable. The humans have created a space where cross-species grieving is possible. They have given us all permission to acknowledge our pain. It is the crying, Valaxis said. It makes emotional expression safe. When humans cry, they show vulnerability first. They lead by example. It makes others feel they can be vulnerable too. This could change everything, Meridax whispered, her crest displaying patterns of awe. The therapeutic applications alone are extraordinary. But more than that, this could transform how we handle collective trauma in the Galactic Council. Valaxis brightened slightly. You see it too. This is not just about understanding humans. This is about all of us learning to grieve together, to support each other across species lines. The research project had begun as a simple investigation into a unique biological trait. But it had evolved into something far more important. A study in emotional connection and cross-species empathy, in the universal nature of loss and the many ways beings could support each other through it. But there was one more lesson the galaxy needed to learn about human tears. And it would come from the most unexpected source. The understanding. 3 days after the Theta Novaris disaster, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the tragedy and plan the memorial services. Ambassador Thrace represented humanity, still raw with grief but determined to honor the dead properly. The council chamber was somber. Representatives from 40 species gathered, many still processing their own losses. The session began with the standard protocols: damage assessment, investigation into the asteroid's trajectory, discussions of improved detection systems for the future. Then came time to plan the memorial. The Zenther representative proposed a logical ceremony, a database of names, uploaded to the Galactic Archive, ensuring the deceased were remembered in perpetuity. Efficient, permanent, practical. The Plorvan representatives suggested genetic markers be preserved, allowing the biological legacy of the lost to be studied and honored through scientific advancement. The Kryn proposed a light ceremony, where representatives would dim their luminescence in synchronized mourning, visible across the galaxy through astronomical observation. Each species offered their own cultural tradition, and each was met with polite acknowledgement. But something was missing. The proposals were respectful but distant, acknowledging death without truly grappling with loss. Ambassador Thrace listened quietly until his turn came to speak. When he stood, every eye in the chamber turned toward him. "Honorable delegates," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I have heard your proposals and they are all worthy. But I would like to suggest we add something else. Something that might seem strange to many of you, but I believe is necessary." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When humans gather to remember the dead, we do not simply catalog names or preserve data. We tell stories. We speak about who these people were, what they loved, what made them unique. We laugh at their quirks and cry at their absence. We make them alive in our memories one more time." "Ambassador," the Zenther representative interjected, "while emotionally evocative, how would such a ceremony serve the practical purpose of honoring 15,000 individuals? The time required alone would be prohibitive." Thrace nodded. "You're right. We can't tell all 15,000 stories. But we can tell some. We can invite beings to share memories of those they lost. We can cry together. We can acknowledge that this loss has broken something in all of us, and that's okay. That's human." "But we are not all human," the Zenther pointed out. "No," Thrace agreed. "But you all grieve. I've seen it these past few days. The Kryn dim. The Peltons go gray. The Zenther withdraw. Every species has pain. We just express it differently. What I'm proposing is that we create a space where all forms of grief are welcome. Where the Kryn can flicker, the Peltons can sing their mourning songs, the Zenther can speak their logical assessments of loss, and yes, where humans can cry." The chamber fell silent. Valaxis, attending as an observer, saw something ripple through the assembly. Uncertainty perhaps. Or possibility. The Kryn delegate, whose name was Praxis, suddenly brightened. "Ambassador Thrace, would you be willing to demonstrate what you mean? Many of us have observed human crying, but we do not understand its place in communal mourning." Thrace hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I can do that." He took a breath. "I lost a friend on Theta Novaris. Her name was Dr. Annika Volkov. She was a xenobotanist trying to adapt Earth plants to grow in alien soil. She used to joke that she was teaching tomatoes to be interstellar travelers." His voice cracked and tears began to fall. He didn't try to hide them. Annika had this terrible habit of humming off-key while she worked. It drove everyone crazy. But after she died, I realized I would give anything to hear that terrible humming one more time. The tears flowed freely now. She was supposed to come back to Earth next month. She was going to be in my daughter's wedding. She was going to meet my grandson for the first time. She had a whole life still ahead of her, and now it's just gone." Thrace's shoulders shook with sobs. The chamber watched in absolute silence. Many had seen humans cry before, but never in this context, never with this level of vulnerability on display to the entire Galactic Council. Then something unprecedented happened. Praxis, the Kryn delegate, dimmed her light dramatically and spoke. "I also lost a friend on Theta Novaris. His name was Kellex. He was a mathematician, obsessed with prime number sequences. He would flicker in prime patterns when he was excited about a discovery. I will never see those patterns again." Her light flickered erratically, the Kryn equivalent of crying. Around the chamber, other delegates began to respond. The Pelothan representative's feathers shifted through colors of mourning as she spoke of her cousin who had died in the disaster. The Zenther delegate, breaking centuries of protocol, admitted that the loss of 3 fellow Zenther had created an unacceptable inefficiency in his cognitive processes, and his voice wavered as he said it. One by one, delegates stood and shared their losses. Some spoke for minutes, others for mere seconds. But each one acknowledged their pain, their grief, their broken hearts. The chamber became a chorus of loss expressed in 40 different ways. And through it all, Ambassador Thrace continued to cry. His tears became a constant presence, a reminder that it was safe to grieve, that vulnerability was not weakness. When the sharing finally ended, the council sat in collective silence. Then Praxis spoke again. "I have lived for 300 years. I have lost many. But I have never mourned like this. I have never had my grief witnessed and acknowledged by others. The humans call this crying, this visible expression of internal pain. But what they have truly shown us is something deeper. They have shown us how to carry loss together. The Peloton representative nodded, her crest displaying agreement. I propose we adopt Ambassador Thrace's suggestion. Let our memorial include stories, shared grief, and space for all forms of emotional expression. Let us learn from the humans how to grieve as a community, not just as isolated individuals. The vote was unanimous. The memorial service for Theta Novaris became the first truly cross-species mourning ceremony in galactic history. Beings from hundreds of worlds gathered, and for 3 days they shared stories, expressed grief in their myriad ways, and learned to witness each other's pain. And the humans cried. They cried for their own losses and for the losses of others. Their tears became a bridge, a universal language that said, "Your pain matters, your loss is real, you are not alone." Valaxis attended the entire ceremony. She listened to thousands of stories. She watched humans cry until they had no tears left, then find more tears the next day. And slowly her own light began to brighten. On the final day she approached Ambassador Thrace. "I understand now," she said. "Crying is not about the tears themselves. It is about the willingness to let others see your pain. It is about trust. Trust that you will be held, not judged. Supported, not rejected." Thrace smiled, his eyes still red from days of crying. "Yes, that's exactly it. My species cannot cry," Valaxis continued. "But we can flicker. We can show our dimness. And for the first time in 30 years, I feel that it is safe to do so." She dimmed her light more than she had in decades, letting her unprocessed grief show. Thrace reached out and placed his hand gently on her crystalline form. "I see you, Valaxis. I see your grief and I honor it." And though Valaxis had no tears, something inside her broke open, releasing decades of suppressed sorrow. Her light flickered wildly, chaotically, expressing what she had held silent for so long. And Thrace stood with her, bearing witness, his own tears falling in sympathy. Around them, other beings approached, creating a circle, offering presents. And the walls between species, between different forms of grief, began to crumble. The transformation. 6 months after the Theta Novaris Memorial, the Galactic Council implemented sweeping changes to how they handled collective trauma and grief. The Council established the Office of Emotional Wellness, with Dr. Sora Nakamura as its first director and Valaxis as her deputy. The research project that had started as a study of human crying evolved into a galaxy-wide initiative to understand emotional health across all species. Dr. Thorne, Meridax, Kesix, and others formed training programs to help beings of all species support each other through loss and trauma. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Before, species existed in emotional isolation. Each had their own grief customs, their own ways of processing loss, and these were kept largely private within species lines. The idea of sharing grief across species, of witnessing each other's pain, had been foreign. Now it was becoming normal. Valaxis stood in the new wellness center, watching through an observation window as a mixed-species grief support group met. She saw a Zenther sitting with a human, the logical being struggling to express loss while the human cried openly. She saw a Plorvan and a Kryn sharing space in silence, one rippling with color shifts, the other flickering with dim light. Sora joined her at the window. "It's remarkable, isn't it? A year ago this would have been unthinkable. We have humans to thank," Valaxis said. "Your willingness to cry in front of us, to show vulnerability, it opened a door we did not know existed." "We didn't know either," Sora admitted. "We never thought about crying as anything special. It's just what we do. But I guess sometimes the most profound things are the ones we take for granted." They watched as the group session ended. The participants emerged looking tired but somehow lighter. The human, Marcus, smiled at the Zenther, Kesix, and clasped his shoulder. Kesix, who a year ago would have recoiled from such contact, leaned into it briefly before straightening. "Dr. Thorne says Kesix has made remarkable progress," Sora observed. "He's learning to express grief verbally, even if he can't cry. He says it's helping him finally process his partner's death." "And Ambassador Thrace?" Valaxis asked. "He's doing well. He's been leading workshops on Earth, teaching other humans about cross-species emotional support. Turns out we have as much to learn from other species as they have to learn from us." It was true. The exchange had gone both ways. Humans had learned about Kryn-like communication, which some found helpful for expressing emotions without words. They had adopted Peloton harmonic mourning, finding the low tones soothing. They had even begun experimenting with Zenther logical frameworks for processing trauma, discovering that sometimes a structured approach helped alongside emotional release. The galaxy was learning to grieve together, each species contributing their unique wisdom, creating something greater than any one culture could achieve alone. But the impact went beyond grief. 3 months later, Valaxis attended a diplomatic negotiation between the Cormith and the Vexians, two species that had been in conflict for decades. The issue was territory, resources, ancient grievances. Standard diplomatic channels had failed repeatedly. But this time something different happened. The human mediator, a woman named Dr. Idara Okoye, did something unprecedented. She asked each side to speak not about territory or resources, but about what they had lost in the conflict. What did the fighting cost them? The Cormith delegate, a crystalline being named Chardin, initially refused. This is not relevant to the negotiation. Humor me, Dr. Okoye said gently. Just try. Reluctantly, Chardin spoke. He talked about the colony lost in a border skirmish. About the miners who never came home. About the families fragmented by war. His voice, usually hard and unyielding, softened. The Vexian delegate listened. Then she spoke of her own losses. The world's damaged. The economy strained. The generation of Vexians who knew nothing but conflict. Dr. Okoye listened to both and then she cried. She cried for the Cormith losses and the Vexian losses. She cried for the waste of it all, for the unnecessary suffering. Your grief is valid, she said to both delegates. Both of you have lost so much. And you're right to be angry about it. But look at what's happening. You're fighting each other, but you're both losing. You're both grieving. You have more in common than you think. Something shifted in that room. The delegates didn't suddenly become friends. The conflict didn't magically resolve. But a door opened. A possibility emerged. If they could acknowledge shared pain, maybe they could find shared solutions. The negotiation continued for weeks, but it eventually succeeded. The Cormith-Vexian peace accord was signed 2 months later, ending 40 years of conflict. Historians would point to many factors that led to the peace, but those in the room that day knew the truth. It started when a human cried, and two enemies recognized their shared humanity. Valaxis read the reports from the negotiation with fascination. She sent them to Dr. Thorne with a message. The implications of human crying extend far beyond what any of us imagined. You have given the galaxy a new tool for peace. Dr. Thorne's response was characteristically humble. We just showed you what we've always done. Sometimes crying is the bravest thing you can do. It says, I'm hurt and I'm not afraid to show it. I trust you enough to be vulnerable with you. That trust, that vulnerability, it changes everything. A year after the Theta Novaris disaster, the Council held a remembrance ceremony. Beings from across the galaxy gathered and once again they shared stories and grief. Ambassador Thrace stood before the assembly. His eyes were dry today, but that was okay. He had cried enough over the past year. Today was for remembering with gratitude, not just sorrow. A year ago, 15,000 beings died on Theta Novaris. Nothing can change that. Nothing can fill that absence. But something has changed in how we carry that loss. We carry it together now. We've learned that grief shared is grief lessened. That tears, in whatever form they take, are not weakness but wisdom. He looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Humans cry. It's what makes us unique in the galaxy. But what we've learned this year is that crying was never just about humans. It was about connection. It was about trust. It was about the courage to be vulnerable. And those things? Those belong to everyone. The chamber erupted in various forms of acknowledgement. The Kryn flickered brightly. The Pelthans sang harmonics of agreement. The Zenther transmitted approval signals. And the humans of course cried. Valaxis approached Thrace after the ceremony. Her light was brighter than he'd ever seen it, almost luminous. You have changed the galaxy, Ambassador. You and your tears. Thrace smiled. We didn't mean to. We were just being ourselves. That is precisely why it worked. You did not try to impose your ways on us. You simply showed us who you are, vulnerabilities and all. And in seeing your tears, we learned to honor our own forms of grief. She paused, her light pulsing with what Thrace had learned to recognize as Kryn emotion. I must tell you something. After 30 years of dimness, my light has returned to full luminosity. I have finally processed my grief for my life partner. I did it by learning from you, by allowing others to witness my dimness, by trusting that I would not have to carry the weight alone. Thrace felt his own eyes growing wet again. Valaxis, that's wonderful. It is because of you. Because of all humans. You cry, and in crying you give others permission to grieve. That is your gift to the galaxy. That night, in his quarters, Thrace recorded a message to send home to Earth. He wanted his daughter to know what had happened, what crying had meant to the galaxy. "Emma," he said, smiling at the camera, "remember when you were little and you asked me why people cry? I told you it was because we feel things deeply. I still think that's true. But I know now there's more to it. We cry because we're brave enough to feel our feelings even when they hurt. We cry because we trust each other to hold us when we're broken. We cry because we know that showing our pain doesn't make us weak, it makes us real. And somehow, impossibly, our tears have become a bridge. A way for the galaxy to connect, to grieve together, to find peace. We didn't set out to teach aliens about emotion. We just cried like we always have. And it changed everything." He paused, wiping his eyes. "I'm crying right now telling you this. Not because I'm sad but because I'm so damn proud to be human. Proud of what we are, tears and all." The message sent, Thrace looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere out there, on thousands of worlds, beings were learning to grieve together. Learning that emotion wasn't weakness. Learning that vulnerability could be strength. All because humans cried. And perhaps, he thought, that was what humanity had always been meant to contribute to the galaxy. Not superior technology or military might or economic power. But this, the simple, profound courage to feel deeply and show it. To cry. To let the tears fall. And in falling, to heal. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Galactic Council established the Day of Shared Tears, an annual remembrance for all beings lost throughout the galaxy. On this day, every species gathered in their own way, but with a shared purpose. To grieve together, to remember together, to cry together in whatever form crying took for them. On the first day of Shared Tears, Dr. Sora Nakamura stood on Earth in a gathering of thousands. Beside her stood Valaxis, visiting from the Kryn homeworld. Around them, humans cried, Kryn flickered, Peltons sang, and Zenther spoke their logical assessments of loss that were no longer quite so logical. "We did it," Sora whispered. "We taught the galaxy to cry." Valaxis's light pulsed warmly. "No, my friend. You taught us something far more important. You taught us that we were never meant to grieve alone. That there is strength in shared sorrow. That tears in any form are the galaxy's way of healing." High above them, in the council station, Ambassador Thrace addressed the galaxy in a live broadcast. "Today we remember. Today we grieve. Today we cry. Not because we are weak but because we are strong enough to feel. Strong enough to care. Strong enough to let our pain show. Humans cry with salt water. Kryn with flickering light. Peltons with mournful song. Zenther with trembling voice. We all have our tears. We all have our grief. And now, finally, we all have each other. So today cry. However you cry, whatever form it takes. Cry for what you've lost. Cry for what you love. Cry because you're alive and because life is beautiful and terrible and worth every tear. Cry because you're not alone anymore. The galaxy cries with you. And across 1,000 worlds, in a billion different ways, the galaxy did.